He only came in for a quiet inspection, but found his janitor sobbing alone in the dark. The reason for those tears wasn't just heartbreaking, it was a betrayal buried inside his own company. And what the CEO uncovered that night would change every life under his roof forever. The fluorescent lights flickered above, their hum blending with the faint squeak of a mop across the marble floor. The store had long since closed for the evening, its towering glass doors locked, leaving only shadows and silence behind. But hidden within that silence was something else, something raw, fragile, and breaking. The man who walked in was not supposed to be there, at least not like this. To the world, to his employees, to even the security cameras watching the front, he was just another sharply dressed customer who had wandered too late into the hushed aisles of the flagship retail store. But behind his cool demeanor, behind the tailored charcoal suit and quiet steps, was a secret. He wasn't just a customer. He wasn't just another passerby. He was the man whose name was on the lease, the man whose vision had built these walls from the ground up. He was the CEO. But tonight he wasn't here as a figurehead. Tonight he had come undercover. He had grown tired of the polished reports, the carefully filtered updates from middle managers, the glossy PowerPoints that never showed the bruises of reality. He wanted truth. He wanted to see what really happened when nobody thought the boss was watching. So he came without warning, without his entourage, without his mask of authority, just a man walking through his own empire, silent and unseen. That's when he heard it, a muffled sound, soft but heavy, like something tearing beneath the weight of the world. A sob, not the delicate cry of a child or the theatrical weeping of someone seeking attention. Number. This was different. This was pain caught in the throat, dragged through clenched teeth, trying to stay hidden but failing. It came from the back hallway near the supply closet. He slowed his pace, his polished shoes clicking against the marble until he stopped just short of the dim corridor. There, hunched against the wall, mop still leaning against the doorframe, was the janitor. An older man, his shoulders bowed not just from age but from years of carrying burdens no one had bothered to see. His work shirt was faded, his hands raw and cracked from chemical burns that even the best gloves couldn't hide. But it wasn't the exhaustion on his body that made the CEO's chest tighten. It was the sound of a grown man breaking. The janitor's hand covered his face, trembling as he tried to silence himself. And then the words spilled out, not meant for anyone to hear, but echoing in the emptiness. "I can't do this anymore. God, I can't. They treat me like I'm nothing, and I need this job, but..." His voice cracked, dissolving into sobs. The CEO froze, hidden in the shadows, torn between revealing himself and staying silent. 1,000 questions rushed through his mind. What had driven this man, one of his employees, to tears? What cruelty had gone unseen in these walls? And most importantly, what would he uncover if he kept listening? He didn't move at first. He just watched. The CEO, Marcus Hale, stood in the darkened corridor, his chest rising and falling in silence. He wasn't just any businessman. He wasn't born into wealth, nor did he inherit some family fortune. Marcus had clawed his way from the very bottom, the son of a single mother who scrubbed motel bathrooms for a living. He knew what it meant to work until your bones ached, to pray no one looked down on you because of the uniform you wore. That's why this moment, watching his janitor collapse under unseen weight, didn't just disturb him. It felt like déjà vu. But Marcus wasn't here to be sentimental. He had come undercover for a reason. Rumors had reached his ears, rumors of discrimination, of workers being treated like second-class citizens, of managers who valued profit more than people. On paper, everything looked clean. Reports painted glowing pictures, audits came back polished. But Marcus knew numbers lied. What didn't lie were eyes swollen from crying when no one was supposed to see. He took one slow step forward. The faint echo made the janitor jolt, his hand flying to his face as he scrambled upright, trying to hide what couldn't be hidden. The man's eyes were bloodshot, his chest still heaving. I'm sorry, sir," the janitor stammered, mistaking Marcus for a late customer. "We're closed. If you'll just wait by the front, I can call someone to help you." His voice shook, but his politeness never cracked, Marcus studied him, the lines of his weathered face, the slouch of his shoulders. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was defeat. He remembered his mother's face when her supervisor at the motel once called her nothing but a maid. He remembered the rage that had burned inside him then, the vow he'd made to one day own something, to change the way people like her were treated.
"What's your name?" Marcus asked softly. The janitor hesitated, caught off guard. "Robert," he said finally. "Robert Jenkins." "Robert," Marcus repeated, like he was committing it to memory. "How long have you worked here?" Robert shifted uncomfortably, wiping at his eyes with the back of his sleeve. 7 years, sir. Since the day the store opened. Never missed a day. 7 years." Marcus felt something twist inside him. That meant Robert had been here from the beginning, through every late-night construction cleanup, through the grand opening, through the expansion years. A loyal man, invisible in plain sight. Marcus wanted to tell him the truth right there, that he wasn't just a customer, that the man standing in front of him was his employer, his CEO, the one with the power to change everything. But something held him back. If Robert knew who he was, he might close off, afraid to speak freely. No, Marcus needed the truth, unfiltered. So he asked gently, "What happened tonight?" For a long moment, Robert said nothing. His gaze dropped to the floor, his lips pressing into a tight line. Then slowly he exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "They treat me like I'm dirt," he whispered, "like I don't exist. Like this uniform makes me less than human. Some nights it's just the words, the way the managers bark orders, the way customers look at me like I'm invisible. But today," he swallowed hard, fighting against his own tears. "Today, one of them shoved me, said I was too slow, called me a useless old man." Marcus's jaw clenched. A shove? In his store? Robert gave a bitter laugh, empty of humor. "I wanted to fight back, I did. But what would happen? They'd fire me. And I can't lose this job. My wife, she's sick. I'm all she's got. So I swallow it, day after day, until I can't anymore." His voice cracked. "I've given this store everything I have, and I'm still treated like trash." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He had heard rumors, yes, but hearing it spoken from a man's breaking soul was different. It was like a wound laid bare. His fists curled, not in anger at Robert's weakness, but at the cruelty of those who had made him feel so small. But Robert wasn't done. He leaned against the wall, staring at the floor like it had answers. "Sometimes I wonder if people like me are just meant to be stepped on. If no matter how hard we work, we'll always be nothing in their eyes." Marcus stepped closer, his voice firm but calm. "Don't say that." "Don't ever say that, Robert." The janitor looked up, startled by the sudden intensity in the stranger's tone. For a moment, Marcus nearly revealed himself. But instead he softened, letting empathy carry his words. "People who say things like that, they're wrong. They're blind. They mistake power for worth. Don't let their blindness define you." Robert stared at him, searching his face, as if trying to place who this man was. But Marcus gave nothing away. Instead, he asked one more question, the one he feared the most. "Who shoved you, Robert? Which manager?" The older man hesitated, torn between fear and honesty. Finally, he whispered a name Marcus recognized all too well, one of his senior managers, a man who had been with the company since the early days, someone Marcus had trusted to uphold the values he preached. And just like that, the undercover visit had turned into something much more. Marcus's heartbeat thundered in his ears. If this was true, if this manager had been abusing workers and hiding it behind perfect reports, then Robert wasn't the only one suffering. The CEO glanced down the hallway, at the gleaming floors and spotless displays. On the surface, his empire sparkled. But beneath the polish, something was rotting. And now he had to decide, would he keep pretending not to see it, or would he risk everything to tear it into the light? Marcus didn't sleep that night. Back in his penthouse apartment, the city skyline glowing through floor-to-ceiling windows, he sat in silence with Robert's words replaying over and over in his head. He had built Hale and Company on the foundation of dignity, respect, and equality, or so he believed. But Robert's quiet despair, his whispered confession of being shoved like an object, shattered that image. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a mirror being held up to Marcus himself. He had trusted the wrong people, delegated too much, believed reports without listening to the ground. He had been so focused on expansion, stockholders, acquisitions, that somewhere along the way he had lost sight of the soul of his company. But not anymore. At sunrise, Marcus pulled on the same plain clothes he'd worn undercover the night before. A faded gray hoodie, black jeans, scuffed sneakers. His face unshaven, hair deliberately messy. No one looking at him would see a billionaire CEO. They'd see just another tired man blending into the crowd. And that's exactly what he needed. He drove not his sleek Bentley, but an old pickup truck, borrowed from a friend. When he pulled into the employee parking lot of his flagship store, no one gave him a second glance. For once, Marcus felt invisible. He stepped through the back entrance where deliveries were made and employees filtered in. Immediately, the atmosphere struck him. It was subtle but clear: fear, resignation. Workers moved fast, avoiding eye contact with supervisors. Laughter was absent. The hum of conversation was replaced by silence broken only by barked orders. Marcus positioned himself near the supply closet, pretending to check a mop bucket. From there, he watched. A manager stormed past, clipboard in hand, scowling. "Pick it up!" "You're moving too slow," he snapped at a teenage stock boy. The boy's cheeks flushed red as he fumbled to stack boxes faster. Another employee, a woman in her 40s, glanced up at the ceiling as if swallowing frustration. Her eyes met Marcus's briefly. There was no spark of joy, no pride, just weariness. This was not the company Marcus dreamed of. Later that morning, while sweeping near the break room, he overheard two workers whispering in hushed tones. "Did you hear what happened to Robert last night?" one said. "Yeah, poor guy. But what can he do? If he complains, they'll fire him. They always protect the managers." "Remember Rosa? She reported harassment last year. 2 weeks later, gone." Marcus's heart clenched. Rosa. He remembered approving a glowing termination report about performance issues. Had that been a lie? The CEO moved deeper into the store, each step tightening the knot in his chest. He had prided himself on running a fair empire, but what he was seeing wasn't an empire, it was a plantation. The breaking point came at noon. Marcus was mopping near the customer service desk when a manager he knew all too well appeared, Daniel Crow, broad-shouldered, smug grin, the kind of man who believed authority was power rather than responsibility. Crow leaned on the counter, barking at a cashier whose hands trembled under his glare. "You think customers come here for your mistakes? You're lucky I don't dock your pay. Next time I'll have you cleaning toilets." The cashier's eyes watered, but she nodded, biting her lip. Marcus froze, fury boiling in his veins. This was it. The very man Robert had named. The one who had shoved him. Crow turned, nearly bumping into Marcus. His eyes flicked down at the mop in Marcus's hand, then back up with disdain. "Watch it, janitor," he sneered, as if Marcus were an insect in his way. The words cut deep, not because of the insult itself, but because of the ease with which it rolled off Crow's tongue. It was second nature. Disrespect wasn't an accident, it was culture. Marcus clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay in character. He couldn't blow his cover yet. Not until he saw the full picture. For the next 3 days, Marcus lived as one of his lowest-paid employees. He scrubbed bathrooms, swept floors, stocked shelves. He worked side by side with people who barely scraped by, who endured insults for the sake of a paycheck. And with each passing day, he saw more. He saw a single mother scolded for asking to leave early to pick up her child. He saw an immigrant worker mocked for his accent, forced to repeat instructions while others laughed. He saw Robert again, moving slower than usual, his back clearly aching. Yet when he paused to rest, Crow walked by and muttered, "Lazy old man," loud enough for everyone to hear. And Marcus saw himself, his name, plastered across the walls. Hale and Company values, integrity, respect, excellence. The hypocrisy was suffocating. By the 4th night, Marcus couldn't contain it anymore. He sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His employees weren't just mistreated, they were dehumanized. And the blame wasn't only on Crow or the managers, it was on him. He had allowed this culture to grow. But that was about to change. The next morning, Marcus returned, not in his hoodie, but in a tailored suit. Not in the old truck, but in his Bentley. He walked into the store through the front doors, his presence commanding the room. Employees gasped, murmurs rippled, and Daniel Crow, standing near the registers, went pale. Because in that moment, every worker who had suffered, every soul who had been silenced, realized who the quiet janitor really was. And Crow realized his career was about to end. The store was unusually quiet. Every employee froze the instant Marcus Hale walked through the front doors in his tailored navy suit, his shoes striking against the polished floor with crisp, deliberate steps. Sunlight spilled through the glass facade behind him, casting a glow around his figure. To those who had only ever seen him in corporate photos, he looked like the man on the posters, the face of Hale and Company, only sharper, more dangerous. Daniel Crow's smug expression faltered. His jaw twitched as if he was forcing himself not to show fear. He muttered something to a fellow manager who quickly backed away, sensing what was coming. Marcus stopped in the center of the store, his presence pulling every eye toward him. Cashiers stopped scanning items. Stock boys abandoned their carts. Even customers turned, sensing something unusual was unfolding. And then he spoke. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried, deep, steady, deliberate. For the past week, I've walked these floors. I've mopped your bathrooms. I've stocked your shelves. I've cleaned up messes no one bothered to notice. And in that time, I've seen more about Hale and Company than I have in years of board meetings. A ripple of whispers surged through the employees. Crow's face drained of color. Marcus's eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on Robert, who stood frozen by the cleaning cart, his mop in hand, their eyes locked. Robert's widened in disbelief. The janitor he had confided in was the CEO. Marcus turned back to Crow. "Daniel Crow," he said, his voice laced with iron. "Step forward." Crow hesitated, then straightened his shoulders and forced a smirk. "Sir, This is highly irregular. If you'd like, we can discuss whatever this is privately." "No," Marcus cut him off sharply. "We'll do this right here, in front of the people you've spent years humiliating." Gasps broke out among the employees. Crow's smirk slipped. Marcus took a step closer, eyes blazing. "I've seen you shove an elderly man, mock immigrants for their accents, threaten to fire mothers for picking up their children. I've heard the names you've called them, lazy, useless, replaceable. And I've seen the fear in their eyes when you walk into a room. Fear. In a place where they should feel dignity and pride." Crow's face reddened. He stammered, Those are exaggerations. You can't take the word of janitors and stock boys over." "Enough," Marcus's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "Do not speak another word." The silence was suffocating. Every eye was glued to the two men standing inches apart. Marcus reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small recording device. He clicked it, and suddenly the store filled with Crow's own voice, recorded from the past few days. The sneers, the insults, the shove against Robert, the laughter as he degraded workers. Word for word, undeniable. Crow's mouth fell open. The employees' faces shifted, from shock to vindication to anger. Murmurs grew into a chorus of disgust. "You see," Marcus said coldly, "when I worked alongside them, they trusted me. They told me what you did, and I listened. Unlike you." Robert's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes. For the first time in years, someone had not only seen his pain, but defended it. Marcus turned in a slow circle, addressing everyone. "This company bears my name, and I will not, ever, allow it to become a place where cruelty is rewarded and dignity is stripped away. I will not let managers like Crow poison the very people who built this empire." His voice thundered now, filling every corner. "From this moment forward, it ends." Crow, desperate, tried one last tactic. "You can't fire me like this. It's humiliating. I've given 10 years to this company." Marcus leaned in close, his voice low but lethal. "And in those 10 years, you've stolen more than money. You've stolen respect. You've stolen humanity. And now I'm taking everything back." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. "Daniel Crow, you're finished. Effective immediately, you are terminated. Security will escort you out." Gasps and cheers erupted at once. 2 guards appeared, summoned silently by Marcus's presence of authority. They moved swiftly, gripping Crow by the arms as he sputtered and protested. No, you can't do this. I built this store. I dash. But his words dissolved into chaos as employees clapped, some even shouting with relief. For the first time, they were seeing justice, not whispered about, not delayed, but executed before their eyes. As Crow was dragged out the doors, Marcus turned back to his people. His voice softened, but it still carried weight. No more silence. No more fear. If anyone mistreats you, whether they're a manager, a supervisor, or even a partner at the top, you come to me, directly. This company was built for you as much as it was built by me, and from this day on, we rebuild it together. The store erupted, not in chaos, but in something Marcus hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Robert dropped his mop and stepped forward. His old hands trembled, his eyes wet. He bowed his head slightly, then raised it with a shaky voice. Thank you, sir, for finally seeing us. Marcus placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. No, Robert. Thank you for reminding me what matters most. And in that moment, in the fluorescent-lit aisles of a retail store, something shifted. Not just power, not just policy, but a culture, a promise, a rebirth. The store didn't return to normal that day, because nothing about it was normal anymore.
The echoes of clapping and voices lingered long after Daniel Crow was gone. For the first time, the fluorescent lights felt less harsh, the air less heavy. People were smiling, not nervously, not to hide their fear, but because they had seen something impossible happen. Robert sat on the bench near the staff break room, wiping his hands on his old work apron. His chest heaved with silent sobs he couldn't hold back. He had seen many men in suits promise justice, but none had delivered it right there, in the open, with no delay. Marcus approached him quietly, his steps deliberate, his expression softer now. He sat beside Robert without ceremony. You've carried this for too long, he said, his voice low. Robert's lips trembled. I thought nobody cared. I thought all we were, to people in power, was numbers on paper. Marcus shook his head, staring at the tiled floor. I was starting to forget what this company was built for. And then I met you. Robert looked at him, startled. You reminded me, Marcus continued, that leadership isn't about profit margins or press releases. It's about people. It's about protecting dignity, about making sure no one ever feels invisible under my watch. The old janitor swallowed hard. For the first time in years, his eyes carried something more than fatigue. They carried gratitude. Outside the break room, whispers turned into conversations into ideas. Employees who had once kept their heads down were lifting them, daring to speak. One cashier said aloud, if he can fire Crow, maybe he'll listen to us too. Another nodded, we need better hours. And childcare. Some of us are barely scraping by. And for the first time, their words weren't drowned by fear. Marcus was listening. Within days, Hale and Company began to transform. Meetings were no longer just executives trading numbers. They included workers from every level of the company. Robert himself was invited to speak in front of senior staff, his trembling voice breaking as he explained how long years of silence had eroded morale. And Marcus didn't just nod politely, he took notes. He implemented. Wages went up. Hours became flexible. The employee suggestion box wasn't a joke anymore. It was a direct line to the CEO. Training programs appeared. Healthcare plans expanded. The culture shifted, and word spread. News outlets ran the story of the CEO who went undercover as a janitor, exposing corruption in his own house. They called it the day Hale and Company. Change workers from other companies whispered that maybe, just maybe, there were still leaders who valued humanity over profit. But not everyone celebrated. Daniel Crow tried to sue. He tried to paint himself as the victim, claiming humiliation, wrongful termination. His face appeared on tabloids, his voice bitter and loud. Yet when the recordings played in court, his case crumbled. Every cruel word, every insult, every threat, played back for a jury that barely needed convincing. The verdict was swift. Crow lost not only the lawsuit, but his reputation forever. And in a poetic turn of fate, he found himself applying for jobs in smaller stores, often rejected once his name was recognized. The man who once barked orders with arrogance now faced the silence of closed doors. Meanwhile, Robert's life changed in ways he never expected. Marcus offered him retirement with dignity, a pension that meant he wouldn't have to scrub another floor if he didn't want to. But Robert surprised him. "If it's all the same to you," he said, smiling faintly, "I'd like to keep working a while. Only not just cleaning. I'd like to help new employees, mentor them, show them this place is different now." Marcus extended his hand, a rare crack of emotion flickering across his stoic face. "Then let's call you what you are. Employee mentor, first of many." The two men shook hands, one scarred by years of labor, the other polished by years of power. Equal now, bound by respect. Weeks passed, months. Hale and Company grew, not just in profit, but in soul. Customers noticed the difference. Employees smiled more, worked harder, because they wanted to, not because they feared punishment. And Marcus himself was changed. He no longer spent his days sealed in offices. Twice a month, he walked the floors again, sometimes in a suit, sometimes in plain clothes. He shook hands. He asked questions. He listened. Because once he had walked as a janitor, and he never wanted to forget that view from the bottom. On a quiet evening, long after the store had closed, Marcus found himself alone in the aisles. The hum of the lights was steady, almost calming. He looked down the polished floors, the neatly stocked shelves, and thought of Robert's words, how he had believed no one cared. Marcus whispered into the stillness, almost to himself, "Not anymore." The world outside might forget stories like Robert's, but Hale and Company wouldn't, not as long as he lived. And to anyone who had ever been humiliated, overlooked, or silenced in the shadows of power, the story now carried a different ending. The janitor had been seen. The bully had fallen. The company had changed. And the message was clear, etched not in contracts or profits, but in action. Dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. And when leaders forget that, it takes just one moment, one voice, one stand to remind them forever.